Me, Dr. Greene, is Pastor Staton Adams. We trust that you are doing well, that your marriages are working well. There are some folks, I imagine, who are not yet married and are getting useful information on marriage. Wherever you are and whatever your situation, we want you to take the next few moments and give attention because we do have some very important bits of information to share with you today. Pastor Adams, good day and welcome.
Good day, Dr. Greene, and pleasant good day to all of our listening and viewing audience. We are delighted once again to be with you on this marriage encounter, our next installment, and we are eager to continue to share with you from where we left off the last time. As we will normally tell you, call a friend, call somebody, and let them join on because we're going to be sharing very, very important information as we go on.
Most definitely. Well, as usual, we begin with prayer, shall we? Father, we give you thanks for the opportunity and privilege to present today on marriage. We acknowledge you as the originator, the one who instituted marriage. We know that your desire is that all marriages work well, and we pray that you will guide us in our discourse. Grant that the information presented will prove meaningful to those who listen. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
We have been talking about boundaries. We have been talking about boundaries for a very long time because boundaries is a very big subject. And we got to the point where we were talking about boundary-resistant spouses. Some individuals do not like boundaries. Some individuals are otherwise loving, caring, kind, compassionate, but when it comes to a particular area in their marriage, it's hands off. And we are talking, or have been talking, about how you deal with a spouse who does not like boundaries. We last week indicated, Pastor Adams, that it is important when you are discussing an issue to identify the specific issue. We shared several things on that particular point. In fact, I think when we ended, there was something we wanted to deliberate on. I can't quite remember what that thing is. I'm not sure if you do.
Yes, because somebody did ask me, what should be my patient's tolerance level, because we are dealing with this item, we are talking to it all the time, going round and round, and we not seem to be getting any headway, no resolution. What's it? So I had to reflect and let them know that what you're actually saying is that you are constantly dealing with the presenting problems and you're not dealing with the real issue. And except you identify that, what is the real issue? Because remember, we were dealing with the illustration, one spouse had an issue about keeping the house clean and tidy, but apart as a partner, and we were talking about, I think we were talking about tardiness, and then we came to dealing with that illustration. We kind of focus on some real things that actually happen. And so I was trying to explain to that person who listens to that program that you're going to have that kind of a thing. Not that something is wrong with your tolerance or your patient level, but it's just that you have not approached the issue how you should approach a conflict. Except you know what the problem is and identify it, you can't get it resolved because, well, if there's a main problem, what are the presenting problems from being tardy? What are the presenting problems from not keeping the place orderly or well kept as this? So you might be fighting up with the presenting problems and have not addressed the main problem. And so that is the point I think we did not make, and I wanted to make that point when we went out of program time. So it is important to identify the issue. You have to know what it is, because you have presenting problems as a result of the main problem. And once you can focus on that main problem, then the presenting problems go away.
So let me put that a little differently, because some persons may be a little confused about presenting problems versus the main problem. When there is an issue, a lot of times there tends to be some spin-off other challenges as a result of this main issue. We say sometimes they're tangential. You have to be careful that you keep the main issue, and do not succumb to the temptation to divert on these, it's as though you're walking a road and there are all these little byways leading off. Keep on the main road. That's the
Yeah.
point we're making.
Yes.
Because when you do that and you do understand, that will take care of the other little tangents that come up here and there. Now, what we really want to focus on today is another very important element of addressing issues. How do you confront an issue? And it is important that you validate your spouse in this process. If your spouse is resistant to boundaries, they still need to know that you understand their perspective. Because if you tell me that I never make a correct point, that I never say anything worthwhile, after a while, I either begin to think I'm a real fool, or, you really have no appreciation for me. It is important that we appreciate the fact that people will have difficulties and real challenges changing, adjusting when their feelings are constantly negated. When you keep putting them down, people will find it difficult to adjust. But if you can say to an individual, hey, listen, I see your perspective. I understand where you're coming from. And in fact, I agree with you on that point and on that other point. My real challenge, however, is this. And so you affirm them, you validate them, let them know that you consider what they're saying to be important, and you are with them up to this particular point. Your only challenge is point X, and so that you can address that. You can say, I'm with you all the way, but you see this particular point, that's not one that I can swallow quite easily.
Yeah, and the opposite of that has some implication, because the opposite of validation is invalidation, and invalidation has some implications, many implications. It suggests whether the person is willing to continue any further conversation or dialogue with you. It affects how the person value themselves, because you rightly said, it's not just value what I'm saying, but what you value me as a person. To contribute to this conversation and to get this thing resolved. And that is why you find in some situations one person goes silent. And then you wonder why they don't want to engage you or speak anymore, because validation doesn't mean that you necessarily agree, but out of love and respect for the person, you must validate their point of view, their opinion. You may not agree, but out of sheer love for you and respect, I listen to you, I hear you through. I will have my opinion to share afterwards about what I think. So it has some other implications, and is not, and that's why you're saying that is it. This intimacy, because remember I said some time ago that because we are actually dealing with boundaries as a result of a conflict as a result of boundaries, and conflict is not something that you want to affect the relationship in ways that is going to trouble the intimacy of the relationship, and invalidation does that. Invalidation does that, causes somebody to not want to communicate, and communication is the key to keeping the intimacy and all of that going, So you have to look at the bigger picture too, why you have to validate the point of view or the opinion of spouse. Do the person, because how does the person feel when you don't validate? I mean, I just came across it last week. Sometime I was reading, I think an old lady gave me this little quote. People may forget what you said, what you did, but people will always remember how you make them feel. And that's a powerful statement, So in this intimate relationship, my husband or my wife is the last person that would not make me feel the way I'm supposed to feel in this relationship, right? Just because they are not validating my point of view, my opinion, how I feel about this thing. Acknowledging that I have the right to think this way, or I have to have the right to express this point of opinion, is acknowledging and validating, right?
I mean, I don't think we can ever overemphasize the importance of making your spouse feel appreciated and understand that you value the contribution that they are making to the relationship.
Yes.
When we talk about validation, another way of putting it is acknowledging that your spouse is an important contributor to the relationship, that your spouse has something that they are bringing to the table. Your spouse must never believe that they are a hindrance and not adding to the building up of the relationship. Invalidation is putting your spouse on a level less than a human being. So we want to take care to ensure that we establish or reinforce the personhood of your spouse. That is really important. That takes us back to what God did in the beginning when he created Adam and Eve. We're talking about the personhood of the individual. Anytime your spouse begins to feel that, hey, I'm not treated like a person, I'm treated like an object, then we have a real challenge, because that individual is going to resist. That individual is going to become turned off. And you spoke about it interfering with intimacy. Intimacy, the openness, the nakedness. They were both naked and unashamed. That element is really very important. Now, I can imagine somebody asking at this particular point, well, how can I make the person feel valued when obviously they're not doing something right? Well, listen, they may not be doing something right. That's a specific thing. But there are many other things that are right about them. And remember the long old principle that we shared. It takes 5 positives to deal with the effect of 1 negative.
Yes.
So you want to be affirming. And this is the point. I want to come back to it. If you wish to say to your spouse, listen, you are always negative, you're always bad, you're always unruly. After a while, these are judgment statements. These are what we refer to as withdrawals. You're not building up, you're taking away, you're subtracting, you're not adding. And the word always is a very powerful word.
Yeah.
It says every single time. And so what you're communicating to your spouse is that he or she never does anything right, he or she never has an important contribution to make, he or she is always a distraction, a deterrent to growth and development of the relationship. That person, over time, will begin to think, well, my spouse doesn't think that I bring anything to the table. My spouse thinks that I am just hindering them, and hence I might as well just withdraw. So the effect of invalidation ultimately is a breakdown of the relationship. And it can break down to the point, it can deteriorate to the point where it disintegrates, which is very dangerous.
Those are not what we say starter up statements when you're going to have a dialogue, and that's why I discuss communication and conflict together. And if I'm dealing with couples in a intervention or a premarital preparation setting, I deal with communication first and then deal with conflict immediately after those 2 topics to one another. Those are terminologies that you don't use. You always or you never. Those you don't use those, right? That shuts the person down.
Exactly, they're loaded.
You always or you never. You don't. That's not part of the vocabulary. That does not feed the communication. That does not make the person open for any further dialogue or conversation, right? Because if I always and if I never, then what's the sense do we have this conversation anyway? Because if I could never get it right, if I could never see as you are seeing, if I could never, then why do we need to have a conversation? Why do we have a dialogue anyway? Right. So you have to get those 2 terminologies out of your vocabulary. They're not good starter up. And I think, and not the last program, sometime before that, remember, we were saying that it is better to start by validating. Enumerate the things that you find that your spouse does well, that you appreciate. Start there. It's just the normal function of the human mind, how we are wired, that affirmation and we talk to that first, and then, however, that's it. So sometimes we start with the negative and the put downs first. That's not the way to start the conversation. You start with validating, and you start with loading heaps of appreciation, and then you say, I give out of my own example. I just think I give from my personal experience how fantastic that works, right? So it is something that works.
So let's share again practically. You are seeking to communicate to your spouse a particular challenge. You're addressing an issue because there's obviously a conflict. Your spouse is not enjoying the boundaries that they should, establish boundaries for the relationship. Your concern is that your spouse is not keeping in line. We want to refer to boundary. Use the analogy of athletes running in a race. You're supposed to keep in your lane, and your spouse is overstepping, neglecting what their responsibility should be, and doing what they ought not to be doing. So obviously there is an encroachment of boundaries, and you want to address that particular issue, and you're pointing that out to your spouse. What we are saying when we talk about validation is that it is important that you communicate to your spouse that you appreciate him or her, that his or her feelings are important to you, that you consider his or her perspective significant, right? So you begin, as you said there, on a positive note, right? I value your contribution. It is important that your spouse knows this. If your spouse is a boundary resistor, let them know that, hey, listen, you are important, you are a person, you have good perspectives. My only challenge is this particular area, because otherwise, if you start with the terms that you just highlighted, we should never use. You always do so and so. That's an attack. When somebody attacks you, what you do naturally is that you get in the defensive,
Yes,
and that is not a good place from which to have a conversation. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely not. And to make your spouse know that you're really into it, and you're on the road to validating and understanding the perspective, is that if you can internalize, and I would normally say that, and that's why we use what we call the attending skills, because if I can rehearse to you what I think I heard you communicate and how this thing is affecting how you're feeling, then I am not just understanding this thing, but I am also understanding from a position of empathy. Because if I can rehearse this thing for you and tell you, well, exactly, this is how I feel. I know you want to get to your appointment on time. I know you're passionate about your ministry, and I admire your drive, and that you want to show that your churches are functioning well. But remember, we made this agreement that so and so and so is supposed to happen. You see, the person is putting themselves in my perspective. Yeah, I see what you want to accomplish. I know how valuable, how important this is. So I'm understanding that you are listening to me from a position of empathy, and you are understanding my opinion, my world, where I am functioning, what is it that is important to me, what is what I want to get done. So that kind of a thing. So it's not. Remember, we said it is a skill as well. It is an art that sometimes we have to painstakingly learn, and that sometimes we have to unlearn some things, and we have to bring to bear sometimes a wider perspective on this, because if we didn't have this kind of experience in our family setting, if we did not deal with these things while we were dating, courting, and courting is the advanced stage. And that's why I normally tell folk, and I think I heard you said that, don't wait until you're actually getting married. If you can get some information ahead of time and get this knowledge that we are sharing here ahead of time, and begin to practice this even before you say I do, it puts you in a better space, in a better place, right? Because if I had known some of these things before I got married, I mean, I would not have acted the way, I would not have communicated the way I communicated if I had known these things before.
So I want to go back again to be very practical. And Pastor Adams, earlier you used an illustration of keeping the house tidy. I want to use another illustration this time. I want to address the issue of, well, in fact, last week I think we spoke to it, of time, right? One spouse wants to leave the house at a certain time. Another spouse is habitually late and is keeping back that other spouse. It could be that, or it could be just the other spouse is concerned that, hey, you are going to work too late, and that is not a good reflection. You know, so time is an issue. And for some people, I heard a gentleman say once, I was listening to a documentary, a man was sharing his experience, and he said, listen, I rather not go to a program at all than to go late. And that was his perspective. And you know, it's good to understand each other's perspective, because some individuals care so much about punctuality and others care nothing about it. An individual who cares and values the punctuality will feel really upset if they're late. And they can get upset to the point where they're better off not attending the function.
Yes.
The other person may not, what's the big deal? At least you get a part of it. You know. So if the issue here is punctuality, and you are at the point where you want to say to your spouse, listen, we have to do something about this. You know, every week we have an argument over this. Every morning, you know, I end up in traffic that I could have avoided if I had left home but 5 minutes earlier. So let's adjust this. Your spouse may say, you want to go ahead, I'll ride the bus, or I'll just go and buy another car. And you know that is not something that you can afford right now. So rather than just storming out and saying, you're habitually late, you're good for nothing, you don't listen to me. No, that's not a good place to begin the conversation. You know, you can say, listen, honey, you know, I really admire some things about you. I admire the way you keep the house. I admire the attention you give to the children. But you know, I have been communicating to you for a long time that we need to work on the area of punctuality. Now, what you do there is that you soften the approach.
Yes.
So that when you begin with the compliment, your spouse listens to you, you know, and is able to take the butt a little more because it becomes softer.
Than if you say you're never on time or you're always late, and you start there, that becomes the issue. And remember, we said adding on which, because you know, repetition deepens impression. Remember, we said that you have to understand and see even the benefits, because we talk about character issue, and understanding it's a growth area for you, because if you can change this one, all these other things are fine, but if you can change it, it's a growth area for you. I am becoming better with my treatment of time and arriving, and it has implications for your own development. So you have to also see how you will benefit if you improve in this area. It's not just that the spouse want to bring this out or get this fixed, but how I personally benefit if I change. Because remember, we did say sometimes you have to point the finger at you to see that, well, I need to change my behavior in this particular ways, and so it's the benefit to you, and then the overall benefit to the relationship.
And sometimes you can share your own experience, your own story, where you came from. You know, you can admit, listen, at one time I had a problem in this particular area. This is how I dealt with it. Consider also how God deals with us, right? I mean, if you are honest with yourself, you're going to admit that you have made a lot of mistakes. You've had a lot of flaws in various areas of your life. How does God approach you? Did God write you off? Did God say you're good for nothing and I don't want to see you? I am fed up. You make me sick. Did God say those kinds of things to you? No, God took a different approach. And it does not mean that God is not going to say, I'm not accepting that sin. But he highlights when I'm counseling and I find an individual who has come to the place where he or she wants to give up in life, you don't approach that person by pointing out their errors. You build them up, you let them see, you lift their self-esteem. At that particular point, they're at the ground. To push them further down is to bury them. What you want to do is to resurrect them. So you begin to give them hope. You begin to let them know that, and you can highlight certain things about them. You have such a pretty face. That person may have looked in the mirror that morning and all they saw was ugly. Not because they were ugly, but because of the negative thought patterns that they have heard over the years and that they have come to accept. And so now you are changing the dynamic and you're saying to that individual, you're so beautiful. When I see you, it lifts my spirit. And what can we do together with that, And so you reinforce the positive so that you can continue the conversation with that individual and lift them to a place of comfort and value. The idea about building up, because remember what we are addressing here is a matter of validating, allowing people to feel valued. If we didn't say it that way before, that's the point. Allowing people to feel valued. When I feel valued, when I feel as though my perspective carries weight, that I have a contribution to make, then I'm better able to work on areas that may need improvement here or there.
And if you're denying the other person that, it means that it's bordering on being selfish, right? Because you might be you're only concerned about yourself because this is the usness experience, right? So if I am being fulfilled or satisfied and my spouse is not, then it's a problem. I always have to be concerned about my other self, right? So you can't take that approach. It's bordering on being selfish, and it is always for the ultimate good of the relationship, for both persons, you see. And so we got to deal with it until we come to the point where both persons are comfortable with this situation and the outcome.
Yeah, we have 1 minute to go. I'd like to just add one thing to what you said there, Pastor. It must never be my happiness at the expense of my spouse's happiness.
Yes.
It must never be your happiness at the expense of your spouse's happiness. Because the two shall be one.
The one.
Right? And that's the idea. Well, I can see that our time has expired. And next week, we're going to share another very important area. Today, we spoke about the importance of validating your spouse. Next week, we're going to talk about another area. I don't want to say it now because I might be tempted. But we do want to say that if you have questions, comments, or concerns, while we dialogued and spoke, you may have thought, I wonder so-and-so. Just write it down, send it to us. Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. That is Marriage Encounter, MARIAGEENCOUNTER at slcadventist, that is ADVENTIST.org. Until next week, same time, may God's richest blessings be yours.